Hello everybody, and welcome back to Dr. Creepy. In tonight's video, we dive into 7 most disturbing true trucker horror stories, chilling encounters that prove the open highway is never as empty or harmless as it appears. From endless desert roads and fog-soaked mountain passes to abandoned rest stops and midnight fuel stations, these stories reveal a terrifying side of life behind the wheel that most people never hear about. Long-haul drivers, night shift truckers, and cross-country haulers share the moments when an ordinary run turned into something they still can't explain. Figures standing alone on the shoulder with nowhere to go, CB radios crackling with voices that shouldn't exist, gas stations glowing in the distance that vanish by morning, shadows pacing rigs mile after mile, and highways that seem to change the longer you drive them. If you're new here, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new true horror stories. Now get comfortable and let's start. I've never liked driving nights across the plains, but freight work doesn't care what I like. I was hauling frozen poultry from Wyoming down toward Oklahoma City, running a late schedule thanks to a mechanical delay outside Cheyenne. I figured I could make up time by staying on the road straight through until sunrise. I loaded myself with enough gas station coffee to kill a horse and rolled south under a black sky that felt like it was leaning down toward the windshield. There wasn't another vehicle for miles, and the radio kept fading into static every time the road dipped between hills. That stretch always felt emptier than the map suggested, like towns and people had once been there and backed away from the land. I don't remember exactly when I first saw her, maybe around 2 in the morning, maybe a little earlier. My high beams caught a person sitting on the concrete divider between north and south lanes, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them like they were freezing. I slowed a bit and leaned closer to the window. It was definitely a woman, thin, maybe in her 30s, wearing a torn dark jacket and jeans. She didn't stick her thumb out, didn't look at me, didn't do anything but stare at her lap as the wind tugged at her hair. I passed, thinking she might be in trouble, but there was no safe shoulder nearby, and the road behind me curved, so I told myself I'd call State Patrol at the next fuel stop. 10 miles later, I still couldn't shake the picture of her. The cold that night was brutal, the kind that cuts skin. Why sit on a divider instead of waiting closer to a call box or a rest area? When I finally hit a town with a 24-hour station, I asked the clerk if they'd heard about anyone stuck on the highway. He didn't know a thing. Said a highway patrol truck had passed earlier and hadn't reported anything. I bought more coffee, thinking I'd dreamt her up out of tired eyes. About an hour later, I saw her again. She wasn't sitting exactly the same way, but close enough that my breath caught. Knees pulled up, jacket pressed tight around her, head bowed. I drove past slowly and actually whispered, "No way." My mind raced trying to make sense of distance. I had driven close to 50 miles since the first sighting, maybe more. There was no way someone on foot could have made it that far ahead of me, not without a ride, and trucks weren't exactly crowding the road that night. I thought about stopping, but something about her posture felt wrong, like she was waiting for something I didn't want to know. I rolled on, chewing at my lip, trying to reason through it. Maybe 2 different women, both stranded, both sitting the same way. It sounded stupid even in my head. Trucker imagination, that's what I told myself. Lots of road, lots of tired nights, lots of weird sightings. Another 30 or so miles, another curve, and then the road straightened again. The divider rose in the narrow beams of my headlights. I felt my grip on the wheel tighten until my knuckles twitched. She was there again, same dark jacket, same pants. Only this time she raised her head just slightly as I approached. Not all the way, just enough that I saw a pale chin and the faint shape of lips slightly parted, like she was whispering something I couldn't hear through the engine and wind. I didn't slow. I pressed the pedal just enough to keep moving and stared directly ahead, refusing to look in the mirrors. My pulse hammered in my neck and my throat felt dry, like I'd swallowed sand. I turned on the radio to drown the silence, but it was still nothing but static. I tried calling my dispatcher, just to hear another person's voice, but the call wouldn't connect. It was like the whole highway had folded itself out of normal geography and I was the only living thing left on it beside that woman. Another town, another gas station. I parked and walked inside, feeling eyes on my back even when the sliding doors shut behind me. The attendant was a younger guy, yawning over his phone and bored to death by his night shift. I asked if they'd had any reports of someone stranded on the highway. He acted like I'd told him a joke. "Nobody comes through here at this hour," he said. I wanted to tell him what I saw, but something about his blank look made me swallow the words. I just bought more coffee and stepped back into the cold. As I climbed into the cab, something cold brushed the back of my neck. Just the wind, I told myself, even though the cab should have blocked the air. I turned the key, switched on the headlights, and stared hard at each reflective surface before pulling back onto the highway. Trucks are supposed to be comforting in their weight and noise, but mine suddenly felt like a tin can rolling through endless night. About 3 hours until sunrise, I saw her yet again. My brain tried to deny it even as my eyes confirmed every detail. Same jacket, same pants, same dark hair whipping sideways in the wind. But something else was different this time. Her elbows were slightly farther away from her body, her shoulders raised a little higher, almost like she was pushing herself up to stand. I felt a warning burn in my stomach, something primal and instinctive, like every nerve ending wanted me to run faster. Without thinking, I pressed harder on the accelerator and kept going until she disappeared behind me. I started muttering out loud just to hear my own voice. Just tired, you're imagining it because you're tired. The wheel felt slick under my palms, even though they were dry. It was fear sweat, the kind that comes not from heat, but from the sense of something deeply wrong. Minutes later, I caught movement in the corner of my eye and nearly veered off the road. A shadow moved in the reflection of my driver's side mirror, not behind me but to the left, like someone was running just outside my peripheral vision, exactly keeping pace with my truck. I looked, no one was there, but in the mirror, the faint shape appeared again, upright, swift, almost gliding beside the guardrail. When I blinked, it vanished. I shut my eyes tight for 1 second and looked again. Nothing but road stripes and steel guard. When the sun finally threatened the horizon, traffic started to appear. I refused to stop until I reached a major truck stop an hour north of Oklahoma City. The lot was full of rigs, engines humming, truckers walking around stretching their legs and smoking. The normalcy hit me so hard I almost cried. I killed the engine, opened the door, and climbed down like I'd aged 10 years. I was walking toward the showers when I noticed a small group staring at something on the passenger side of my cab. I walked over slowly, heart pounding again. One of the drivers turned and looked at me with uncertainty. He pointed at the passenger door. I leaned in close. On the dust and road grime covering the metal, there were streak marks, thin ones, like fingertips had dragged across the door while the truck was moving. 5 lines, slightly curved, starting near the top of the window and swooping down toward the handle. The grime had been smeared away where the lines traced down, as if someone with freezing cold hands had pressed against the truck and slowly slid downward. I told myself road debris could make patterns. Wind could move dust. But everyone there knew those weren't random smudges. One trucker said quietly, "Looks like somebody was holding on." The phrase made my stomach twist. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted a shower hot enough to burn the memory out of me. I skipped sleep and kept moving after that, purely because stopping anywhere longer felt dangerous. Every reflection bothered me. Every gust of wind felt like fingers curling through the metal gaps of the cab. I refused to take night assignments for 3 months straight after that. I'd rather lose money than drive under darkness ever again. A month later, on a day shift outside Amarillo, I stopped at a way station. The officer checking paperwork noticed my eyes drifting toward the highway. After a quiet moment, he said something that froze me to the asphalt. "You're looking for the woman, right?" I played dumb because I didn't want to hear it, but the officer nodded toward the open road beyond the way station. "You're not the first. Drivers report a woman sitting on the divider sometimes. Some say she's trying to get home. Some say she's not human at all. Nobody stops. They say she appears in places no one could walk to, always alone, always waiting." I asked if the patrol ever checked. and he shook his head. We've looked. There's never anyone there when we go. I drove away without saying another word. The road felt endless again, but daylight made it easier to breathe. Then, just as the officer's station shrank behind me, I glanced in the side mirror. For 1 second, only a second, I saw her reflection sitting on the median fence a half-mile behind me. Knees bent, arms wrapped, hair moving in the wind. When I looked away from the mirror and back again, she was gone. That was years ago. I refuse to take night routes now. I stay off that highway whenever possible, and when I can't, I only drive those miles during the day. I don't know whether she's a ghost, a hallucination, some piece of the road itself, or something that never had a name to begin with. I only know that if I ever see her sit up fully, look directly at me instead of the asphalt, I will quit trucking for the rest of my life and never set foot behind a wheel again. Sometimes I wonder if she's waiting for that moment, waiting for me to come through that same stretch again, waiting for me to be tired enough or desperate enough to stop. And every now and then, when I'm crossing a state line after sundown, despite every precaution I take, I feel an icy draft slip across the back of my neck, like someone is reminding me she's still out there, sitting and watching, waiting for another night when I can't avoid the road. And I swear, although I try not to look, every mirror in the cab seems to catch a flicker of someone small and still sitting somewhere just out of reach, like the darkness hasn't forgotten me yet. I used to think loneliness was the worst thing a driver could face at night, but I learned that being alone isn't nearly as terrifying as realizing you're not. There's something about long stretches of highway that feel suspended from the rest of the world, especially after midnight. City laws, everyday logic, even time itself seems to loosen its grip when you're miles away from lights and towns. I've always preferred night hauls because traffic thins. Dispatch stops bothering you as much, and you can sometimes convince yourself it's peaceful. But peaceful turns to unsettling when the dark stops behaving the way darkness should. I left Denver around 10 at night, hauling electronics toward Tulsa. Forecast called for clear skies across the plains, and the air was sharp and cold enough that I welcomed the heater inside the cab. I settled into that familiar steady hum, engine vibrations rolling up through the floor, tires singing against asphalt in a pattern I'd listened to my whole driving life. The radio faded into static so early I decided to turn it off rather than fight with stations. I drank lukewarm coffee and watched the highway curve into blackness broken only by my headlights. Everything felt ordinary at first, nothing hinting at what the night had waiting. Somewhere after the Kansas border, I noticed a set of taillights way ahead. Not close, just two faint red dots hovering at the limit of my high beams. I don't usually see many cars along that stretch at night, especially heading east at that hour. The movement seemed smooth, steady, the lights rising slightly whenever the road crested small hills, then dipping as it descended. It was ordinary enough that I didn't pay much attention for a long while. Only after 15 minutes or so did something feel slightly off. I was gaining on the vehicle ahead, but very slowly, almost like I wasn't moving at highway speed. At first I assumed they were just taking it slow, maybe hauling something delicate or maybe tired. But the distance between us didn't close normally. Every time I thought I was finally drawing near enough to see the body of the vehicle, the lights seemed to push just a little farther, like they were adjusting to stay ahead. Not accelerating, adjusting. Something about it made the hairs on my arms stand up without warning. I eased off the gas slightly, thinking maybe I was just zoning out, projecting weird ideas into the road because of fatigue. The distance widened, and the taillights shrank until they were only tiny reflections bouncing in the dark. After a while, they vanished completely as the highway curved east. I figured that was that. Strange, maybe, but hardly alarming. 40 minutes later, I saw them again. Same color, same spacing, same height off the ground. My heart thudded against my ribs. I remembered the exact tint of red, a slightly burnt hue instead of the bright LED most new vehicles have. These were older bulbs, not ancient, but older. A truck like mine, maybe. But there are thousands of trucks with that look. It could have been coincidence. I convinced myself of that. The road dipped under a bridge, and the color flickered strangely, like something blocking one light momentarily. I stared longer than I should have, trying to catch the shape of the vehicle from the reflection alone. The separation between the lights looked strangely familiar, almost identical to my own. I shrugged it off and kept going. I finally passed them when they entered a rest stop, and I didn't look to see what kind of truck it was. I didn't want to look, honestly. About an hour before dawn, the highway turned into flat farmland. Nothing around but windbreak fences, the occasional barn light miles off, and the steady rhythm of asphalt lines flashing under the headlights. The sky was starting to lighten faintly behind the clouds, giving that ghostly gray glow that isn't sunrise but the hint of it. I rolled through another long bend and nearly slammed the brakes because there they were again, those same taillights, just ahead of me. Closer this time, flickering faintly like heat shimmer in summer, although the night air was below freezing. My pulse skittered. I switched lanes slowly, planning to overtake just to reassure myself, maybe see the cab, maybe wave, maybe realize it was nothing strange at all. But as I pulled alongside, something odd happened. The vehicle ahead moved slightly to keep pace with me. Not enough that it looked intentional, just enough that I couldn't draw level. I sped up. It sped up. I slowed. It slowed, all at identical increments. I felt cold sweat form at my hairline. I forced myself to accelerate sharply, pushing the RPMs higher than I normally would. I pulled ahead enough that the taillights dropped from my peripheral. Relief washed over me until I looked into the side mirror. A faint red glow flickered in the exact position my own taillights would appear if I were behind myself. I blinked again and again until my eyes hurt, but every time I checked the mirror I saw the same thing. Two distant red spots, perfectly aligned with the reflection of my trailer edge, almost like I was looking at myself from two directions at once. I told myself it had to be someone drafting, maybe another tired driver sticking close to conserve fuel. But nobody drafts that close at night on a nearly empty rural highway. I tried calling dispatch out of instinct, wanting a normal voice to pull me back into sanity, but the call dropped immediately with no signal. There should have been towers along that route, but apparently not at that stretch. Around 5 in the morning, with the sky still an unbroken dull gray, something happened that still knots my stomach when I think about it. The taillights ahead suddenly jerked into view again, not behind me, but ahead like the road looped somehow. The exact same spacing, the exact same vibration pattern. I slowed dramatically just to prove to myself it was another vehicle. The lights slowed at the exact same rate, like a mirror. Exactly like a mirror. At that moment, it hit me. Not only did the lights match speed, they matched every slight correction I made with my steering. When I drifted half a foot left, they drifted half a foot left. When I tapped the brake, they dimmed as though I were looking at a distant reflection of my own signals. My stomach twisted itself into knots. I stared at the lights so long I forgot to breathe. Some irrational part of my brain whispered that maybe I was stuck behind myself, like time had folded or the road had doubled along itself. I shook the thought away instantly. It was ridiculous, impossible. But another part of me couldn't fully dismiss it, because what I was seeing wasn't a coincidence. It was precise. Too precise. The terrain leveled out, and the faint pre-dawn light gave enough visibility that I finally saw the outline of the vehicle. My throat went dry. It was a truck, a semi. Dark cab, long trailer, and even from a distance I recognized the silhouette. Familiar curves, familiar spacing. I felt ice crawl along my spine. Identical build, identical shape, identical to mine. I forced myself to look down at my dashboard, just to ground myself in something concrete. When I lifted my eyes back to the highway, the truck ahead was closer, as if the gap had closed while I blinked. The taillights pulsed faintly, like the glow reflecting off my own trailer whenever I braked. I reached for the CB, desperate for human presence, but the only sound that fizzed through the speaker was a low, steady crackle. No chatter, no channel noise, just static punctuated by occasional pops like someone whispering far away. Clouds thickened overhead until dawn looked like permanent twilight. I pressed on, rigid behind the wheel, trying to convince myself that paranoia was to blame, that fatigue was twisting perception. But deep down, something felt fundamentally wrong with the night. like the highway wasn't actually leading anywhere familiar. Eventually, fatigue forced me off at a truck stop outside Wichita. When I parked, the world felt too still. I climbed down and stretched, feeling my joints creak. I walked into the diner hoping for coffee strong enough to slap sense back into me. While waiting for the waitress to fill my mug, I caught a glimpse through the window of a truck pulling into the parking lot. Something in me froze. It was identical to mine. Same make, same color, same trailer shape. Nothing unusual about drivers owning similar rigs, but the timing ripped all calm out of my chest. The truck parked 2 spaces away from mine. I stared through the glass like my brain needed proof. Same brand decal on the trailer door, same paint wear pattern along the lower panel, even the same faded sticker on the bumper, except mine didn't have a sticker on the bumper. I had removed it months earlier. My heart pounded painfully as I stood up. I needed to go outside, needed to confirm what I thought I saw was just coincidence. But when I stepped out into the cold morning air, the space where the truck had parked was empty. No engine noise, no taillights, no sign anyone had just pulled in. I scanned every lane and service area, but the only rigs present were ones I'd already noticed when I parked. I climbed into my cab and double-checked the bumper myself. No sticker, no sign anything had recently been scraped. Nothing different or strange. I forced myself to rest for a couple hours, but sleep refused to cooperate. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw 2 red lights drifting in darkness, rising and falling like a heartbeat I didn't recognize. When I hit the road again near noon, everything was bright, ordinary. Traffic increased, radio stations held steady signal, and I almost convinced myself it had been exhaustion playing tricks. I rolled into Tulsa just before sundown and unloaded without trouble. Everything felt normal, boring, mundane. But when I checked my dashcam footage later that night, I saw something that turned my stomach upside down. At several points during the night, my rear-facing camera flashed with faint red reflections hovering behind me at varying distances. On at least 3 occasions, the reflections matched the exact position and brightness of my own taillights responding to brake pressure, except they came from behind the camera, disappearing the moment the angle shifted. And at precisely 4:23 in the morning, for less than a second, the camera showed a dark, distant truck ahead with identical taillight configuration. Only the shape was hard to distinguish, like the camera was picking up something in a reflection rather than reality directly. I thought maybe glare from my own brake lights was bouncing off internal surfaces, but something didn't add up. The angle didn't match any reflective surface I knew of. The timing didn't line up with my braking intervals according to the engine log. It was like the reflection had its own rhythm, influenced by something outside my truck but synchronized with it somehow. I didn't show the footage to anyone. I deleted it. I felt embarrassed even imagining myself trying to explain it. And maybe I would have moved on if something else hadn't happened. 2 weeks later, during a daylight run through the same region, I passed a traffic accident along that route. 2 rigs collided head-on just before sunrise. One of the officers redirecting traffic mentioned quietly that they'd found a 3rd set of tire marks along the pavement, leading the wrong direction, fading into nothing before reaching either truck. No physical vehicle matched those tire tracks. No one could figure out where they led. I didn't take the night run through Kansas again for years. Still don't unless dispatch forces my hand. And sometimes, while I'm driving in daylight across open country, I still check the mirror, expecting to see 2 faint red lights flickering behind me, like something unfinished trying to catch up. I can't prove anything. I don't even talk about it, except in spots like this where strangers swap stories. But I know what I saw wasn't fatigue. I've been exhausted before. I know the difference between imagination and something external pressing into real space. Most people think highways are empty at night. I know better. Highways are mirrors, stretching through places where time doesn't always hold shape. And every time I drive alone after midnight, I feel the possibility, no matter how faint, that I'll catch up to myself again someday. Or worse, find myself being followed by something that moves exactly the way I do, but isn't actually me at all. I was heading south toward Lubbock when dispatch rerouted me through Route 77 due to some construction along the interstate. I had driven stretches of that road before, mostly during daylight, but rarely at night. I remember thinking the darkness felt heavier than usual that evening, almost like it was thick enough to push the truck slightly sideways with each mile passed. I had another 7 hours ahead of me, and the already tired feeling behind my eyes suggested I should probably have pulled off earlier, but money is money, and dispatch was already grouchy about late deliveries. It must have been a little after 1 a.m. when I first heard the message through the CB radio. A low voice, barely above a hum, cut through static in a way that made me think it was accidental chatter. "Stop before the old bridge. Last station before the bridge." That's what it said. I waited to hear more, but it faded almost immediately back into background noise. I assumed maybe construction or a detour. Sometimes small stations around rural routes broadcast warnings or reminders to truckers. The problem was, I didn't remember any bridge along Route 77 that required warning. I'd never seen one, and I'd driven that route more than a few times. The road narrowed over time, the shoulders shrinking until everything was pressed between barren fields that stretched into pitch black on both sides. I could see the silhouette of wind turbines occasionally appear against the sky, like tall skeletons turning silently in the breeze. Even though I knew they were harmless machines, something about their shapes under starlight made me uneasy. The red warning lamps at their tops blinked in unison, but intermittently I noticed one that blinked slightly out of sequence from the rest, like it was trying to catch up. Half an hour passed without seeing another vehicle. The loneliness of long-haul driving usually feels routine to me, but something about that particular stretch of Route 77 felt wrong, emptier than normal, like I had crossed into a region nobody used at night by choice. When the CB crackled again, I jumped so hard my knee hit the underside of the wheel. Same voice, slightly clearer this time. Nearest fuel before bridge ahead, 2 miles. It wasn't threatening, it wasn't urgent, but something about the tone scraped nerves I didn't expect. I turned the CB volume down, but not off, just in case. 2 miles later, as if on cue, headlights revealed a small gas station on the right, a single canopy over 2 fuel pumps, and an old brick building connected to a convenience store with a dusty neon sign buzzing faintly above the window. It flickered in patterns that made the light look uncertain, like it was trying to remember how electricity worked. "Last fuel stop before bridge," the radio repeated, softer, as if inside my head rather than transmitted through speakers. I slowed down, but didn't stop immediately. My tank was over half full, no reason to refuel. My mother used to say something belonged to every road that wasn't listed on a map, and sometimes those things didn't want to be approached. I always thought that was one of those rural superstitions older people passed around to make nighttime seem dramatic. But watching that tiny station emerge like a ghost in the dark, I understood why people might believe such things. There was no signage naming the station, no price board, no cars, no movement, just the faint buzz of a neon bulb and a small building that looked like it belonged in some decade that had forgotten to end. I kept rolling past and told myself I made the smart choice. Don't stop at isolated places unless necessary. Everyone knows that, especially truckers. Another 20 minutes passed. No station behind me, no bridge ahead, just the rolling blacktop cutting through empty land. I tried the radio again, flipping through channels, but all I heard was dead air. Even weather stations seemed missing. Usually there's a NOAA broadcast somewhere, but not there, not that night. Just when I started to think I must have misread everything, the headlights revealed another gas station coming up. Same canopy style, same 2 pumps, same brick convenience store, same flickering neon sign above the window. For a moment I thought I was looping somehow, maybe took a wrong turn, doubled back without noticing. But the road had been a straight line for over 20 miles. No turnoffs, no intersections, no circles. My pulse tightened. I checked the odometer against my earlier readings. I was definitely farther south. But somehow, impossibly, the exact same station stood beside the road again, positioned almost identically but maybe tilted slightly differently against the field. I slowed down even more this time, unsure if I should stop or just keep going. Something was wrong with my breathing. Every instinct screamed not to go near that place. That's when the CB came back alive, but the voice wasn't a transmission now. It sounded like someone whispering inside the cab itself. Last station before the bridge. Fuel now. My throat closed. I turned my head cautiously toward the passenger seat. Not fast, just slow enough to confirm nobody was there. And I can't describe the relief mixed with fear that washed through me when I found the seat empty. I thought maybe fatigue was making voices out of engine sound. That happens sometimes after too many hours awake. Another 10 minutes, another station, exactly the same. Same pumps, same building height, same dark windows, same flickering neon shape that wasn't legible from any angle. The neon flickered 3 times, paused, and flickered again, exactly matching the pattern from the previous 2 stations. I slowed nearly to a stop, staring at the building. There were no lights on inside, no clerk visible, no vehicles. Just a hollow, quiet building positioned close enough to the road that I could make out the cracks in the red brick, the chipped paint around the metal doorframe, the thin film of dust on the pump handles. Everything looked abandoned, yet somehow too intact for abandonment. The CB hissed sharply, like someone inhaling through gritted teeth, and then the same whispered voice again, fuel before crossing. I snapped the radio off entirely and gripped the wheel tighter than necessary. My breathing came shallow now, not from exertion but from a wrongness I couldn't describe. The human brain has a way of recognizing danger before logic does. Mine recognized it then. Every few miles another identical station emerged, each one looking slightly more deteriorated than the last. First it had dust, then boarded windows, then shattered ones. The neon sign eventually was just a metal frame with dead wiring dangling like veins. But the pumps remained, always the same too, always angled the same way toward the road, always waiting. At some point, exhaustion gave way to fear-driven alertness. My foot trembled slightly against the pedal. I wasn't tired anymore, not physically. I was wired awake by something older than fear. It felt like the road wasn't just a road, but a path designed to trap me into making a choice. Stop, or continue into something worse than turning back. Eventually, far ahead, I began to see a faint outline of something spanning the horizon. A structure, maybe a bridge. But the odd thing was, it wasn't tall enough to be an overpass, and it wasn't shaped like any modern bridge I'd seen. It was long, stretching across a low valley, made of dark metal beams that disappeared into dense mist hovering above the ground. That mist didn't behave like fog. It didn't shift with air movement. It hovered, motionless. The CB turned itself on again with a clicking sound. I swear on everything I own, I never touched the switch. The low voice returned, and this time the whisper carried a faint metallic edge under it, like someone dragging a metal chain across concrete while trying to speak. Last station before crossing. Fuel now. It said it once. Just once. I forced myself to speak out loud, anything to break the internal panic. No, I'm not stopping. My voice shook. The CB answered immediately, in that same tone, then do not cross. My stomach flipped. There are moments in life when instinct overrides reasoning. That was mine. I pulled over onto a narrow gravel shoulder, shifted into neutral, and sat motionless with my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I stared at the looming structure ahead through the windshield. Every fiber of my being told me not to cross whatever that thing was. After several long minutes, headlights appeared behind me, a pickup truck moving slowly, too slowly. It passed without hesitation, without slowing, without acknowledging my presence. It rolled straight toward the bridge and disappeared into the mist. The truck didn't emerge on the other side. Not for the minutes I watched. Not at all. I don't know how long I sat there, heart hammering inside my throat. Eventually, I forced myself to turn the rig around. A U-turn on a narrow gravel shoulder is something truckers avoid for 100 safety reasons, but fear is its own permission. I turned around, wheels grinding gravel, trailer racking side to side until I regained the asphalt heading north. I drove fast, faster than I should have. Something kept whispering in my mind, do not stop, do not look back. When dawn finally cut through the sky, Route 77 widened again. Intersections appeared. Civilization resumed, like nothing abnormal had ever existed miles behind me. When I checked the map later at a diner outside Wichita Falls, I found something unsettling. There were no bridges listed anywhere near where I drove, and more importantly, no gas stations of any kind along that stretch. My GPS history showed a gap where those locations should have been logged, as if my truck simply passed through blank space. No coordinates, no timestamp, nothing. Just asphalt distance without recorded geography. The next day, another driver from my company asked if I'd taken Route 77 recently. I asked him why. He rubbed his forehead and said, "I heard someone say the CB keeps warning about a station that doesn't exist." I didn't answer. I didn't want to talk. There are some things a person can know about a road without ever being able to explain it to others. I avoid Route 77 at night now. If dispatch tries to send me that way, I wait until dawn, no matter how angry they are. Because somewhere along that stretch lies a place pretending to be a fuel stop and a metal crossing pretending to be a bridge. And whatever waits beyond that bridge isn't road at all. It's something the maps don't recognize, and something that whispers warnings only to drivers who shouldn't be there. There's a thing most people don't think about when they see a big semi rolling down the interstate. The cab isn't really empty. There are shadows inside, reflections in the glass, movements in the mirrors, shapes that pass too quickly to identify. Most of the time, it's just tricks of light and fatigue. But every trucker has a story they don't like telling, something they brushed off back then, but when they're alone at night, it claws back into memory. Mine started on a route through New Mexico 3 winters ago. I was hauling refrigerated produce out of California headed east, planning to stop in Amarillo before sunrise. The night was cold enough that the desert had that brittle stillness you only get when the wind dies completely. The road was empty for hours at a time, and even the usual occasional convoy or cross-state rigs were nowhere in sight. I hadn't seen another pair of headlights since I crossed the Arizona border. Usually that silence is peaceful, but something felt off that night. The kind of quiet where your mind keeps waiting for a sound that never comes. Around 2 in the morning, I noticed something small in the peripheral reflection of my driver's side mirror, something shifting on the sleeper bed behind me. I assumed it was just one of my jackets sliding off its hook, or maybe a bag shifting with the road vibration. I didn't think much about it. Night driving makes every object look like a figure if you stare long enough. Another hour went by. I took a sip of the worst truck stop coffee known to man and glanced at the rearview mirror again. Something about the dark corner behind the passenger seat made my eyes lock onto it. Like something was hidden there, just tucked far enough behind the seat that only a piece of it was visible. I adjusted the mirror and squinted. It looked like a shape, possibly clothing. A jacket, maybe, but the part I could see looked rounded, like a shoulder. My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribcage before logic smothered it. I reached back while keeping one hand on the wheel and brushed my fingers along the edge of the sleeper mattress. Nothing, just blankets, pillow, and empty space. I told myself fatigue was playing tricks. I'd been on the road for 3 days with barely any proper sleep, grabbing rest in 2-hour chunks that were hardly restful. But then the breathing started. Soft at first. Shallow, steady inhales that weren't mine. Too quiet to notice at first over the engine, but unmistakable once my brain locked onto the rhythm. It came from behind me, not loud, not obvious, but real enough that I suddenly sat bolt upright. I held perfectly still, barely daring to breathe myself. The breathing continued. Calm, even, like someone sleeping lightly. The air in the cab suddenly felt too dense, like it had been warmed by another living body. I flicked on the interior cab light, fast and suddenly. Nobody. Just the same messy blankets, same empty berth, same jacket hooked against the side. But the air was warm. I swear to this day I felt heat radiating from where someone's body should have been resting. I turned the light off and pulled into a well-lit rest stop as fast as I safely could. The second I parked, I climbed out and opened the sleeper compartment from the outside just to reassure myself. I swept my hand across the mattress, pressed into the pillow, still warm. I hadn't been back there in hours. I forced myself to calm down long enough to grab a cold soda from the vending machine inside the rest stop building. When I came back out to the lot, I noticed something through the windshield that made my knees go weak. A shape slumped in the passenger seat, I froze on the asphalt. For the longest moment, I just stared. The shape didn't move, didn't turn, didn't even breathe visibly. I forced myself to walk closer, step by step, watching through the glass. When I reached the truck door, the passenger seat was empty again. Completely empty. I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because my brain needed to push the fear away somehow. I told myself I'd stared at shadows through glass reflection and nothing more. I climbed back into the cab and kept driving. The breathing returned within minutes. Again, slow, steady, coming from behind me. I told myself over and over to ignore it. That sound could be wind, engine vibration, who knows what. But each mile made it clearer. Every inhale sounded human, real. I checked the rear view. Nothing. But I couldn't shake the certainty of someone lying back there. Somewhere around the New Mexico-Texas border, I hit a long stretch of darkness where not even the moon was visible. The road dipped slightly, enough that the silence seemed to get heavier with the air pressure. Out of nowhere, the sleeper curtain shifted. Just a slow drag, like something brushed against it while turning over. My whole body locked stiff. I remember whispering, "Hello," like an idiot, even though I knew nobody should be there. The moment silence answered me, I stepped harder on the gas than I ever had before. I needed out of that place. I needed daylight. I needed anything except another mile in that suffocating dark. Then something happened that I can't rationalize. The reflection in the passenger side window shifted. It wasn't my reflection. I watched it form, slowly like a face leaning forward from the sleeper toward the glass. Not detailed, no clear features, just the outline of a head and shoulders, angled in a way a resting human would lean forward slightly as they slept upright. I turned sharply to look directly at the passenger seat and saw nothing. But in the reflection, the shape stayed. My throat closed. Nothing in reality. But in the reflection, a resting human shape sat leaned slightly forward, head at an unnatural downward angle like someone sleeping too deeply. I didn't blink. I couldn't. My pulse hammered in my ears and drowned the engine sound. Every instinct screamed that if I jerked the wheel or turned too suddenly, something might actually move behind me, something I didn't want to see waking up. I forced myself to keep driving until a faint blue glow on the horizon finally appeared. Not sunrise yet, just the earliest hint of it. But as the sky brightened, the breathing stopped. Cold air returned to the cab. Silence filled everything. When full daylight finally arrived, I pulled over and opened both cab doors wide. I crawled into the sleeper, checked every inch. Nothing. But the pillow was still faintly warm. The strangest part? My dash cam picked up faint sound that night, soft rhythmic noises exactly matching a slow human sleep pattern. My own mic recorded steady breathing during hours I wasn't even tired or leaning back. I showed it to exactly nobody. I deleted it, same as the last time something unexplainable happened on the road. Because the moment you try to explain it, you start admitting it was real, and I don't want to believe that. Since that night, I've slept with the sleeper curtain closed tight whenever I rest, and I never leave it partially open. Ever. Sometimes, though, when I'm several hours into night driving and there's no radio signal and the wind dies enough to hear shifting inside the cab, I swear I can still hear it, soft, steady, human breathing just behind me. And I know better than to check the mirror. I've driven 40 years on the road, and I've only pulled out of a route twice because something felt wrong. And both times I convinced myself I overreacted. But this one night on Route 60 outside New Mexico still bothers me more than anything else. I don't scare easily. You spend decades hauling freight cross-country. You see accidents, you see arrests, you see things people lie awake imagining. But nothing I'd ever seen prepared me for a night when law enforcement didn't feel like law enforcement at all. I was hauling toward El Paso on a long, empty night. Fog had rolled in from the mountains thick enough that my headlights barely carved through it. The radio was quiet, not even trucker chatter about conditions. Somewhere after midnight, my speed dropped just from cautious instinct. I wasn't tired, but something about the atmosphere made my hands tighten on the wheel. The fog glowed with my headlights, turning the world into a wash of gray vapor and shadowy asphalt. A siren suddenly flashed behind me, blue and red lights flickering against the fog like lightning pulsing instead of striking. I looked in the mirror and saw a highway patrol cruiser gaining speed. At first, relief passed through me. Law enforcement on a night like that made me feel safer. At least until I noticed something strange about the cruiser's markings. The unit number painted near the driver's door read 09, just 09 in large dark numerals. No state marking visible in the rear reflection. That isn't normal. Every cruiser has a full vehicle number and a district assignment code. I pulled over anyway, protocol, no matter how odd it looked. The cruiser parked behind me for a moment without anyone stepping out. The lights stayed on, engine idling low. I rolled down my window halfway. A voice came through a speaker, monotone and faintly static-filled, like a radio feed being rebroadcast through a system older than it should have been. "Driver, remain in the vehicle. Is this your truck?" "Yes," I answered. "Everything okay?" No response for what felt like a full minute. Then the voice again, "Remain inside." The phrasing struck me as odd. Officers usually ask for documents right away or explain the reason for the stop. I waited, heart rate ticking upward. The fog swallowed most of the cruiser, leaving only the top flash visible. Finally, a figure stepped out. The highway patrol uniform looked right, badge, belt, radio, flashlight. But something felt wrong. Maybe it was the posture, or maybe the way the beam from the flashlight didn't cut through the fog correctly. The officer walked up beside my cab without shining light in my eyes. He kept the beam aimed toward the pavement, as if looking for something under the truck instead of at me. "License and registration," he said, monotone. No inflection. I handed them down and tried making eye contact through the side mirror, but the fog obscured his face. He stepped back a few feet and pointed his light at my side compartment. "Please open that panel." I hesitated. "Which panel?" "The passenger side storage," he said instantly. That struck me harder than anything, because the storage hinge on my passenger side had broken earlier that week, and I'd temporarily secured it with a cargo strap. That's not something you could see in the dark, not through fog, not without already knowing. "How did you?" I began. The officer cut me off. "Open the compartment." "I can't," I said honestly. "It's tied. It broke earlier." Silence. Then, faint but clear, "Of course it did." The phrasing chilled something in me. I'd never heard a cop talk like that in the middle of a traffic stop. Then he asked, "Do you know why you're being stopped tonight?" That's textbook officer speech, but the tone wasn't. It sounded like someone reading a script who'd never spoken aloud before, like the words held meaning beyond actual procedure. "No," I said slowly. "Why am I being stopped?" A long pause. Then, "You were reported traveling alone." The words hit me wrong. "I am alone," I replied. Another pause, longer this time. Finally the voice, lower now, "Not anymore." My bones turned to ice. I reached for the ignition instinctively, ready to drive if anything strange happened. But before I could turn the key, the cruiser lights flickered violently and shut off. The fog swallowed everything in darkness behind me. I threw the cab door open and stepped out, panicked enough to break procedure entirely. The cruiser was still physically there, engine idling, but no officer was visible. I moved slowly toward the car. The driver's door was closed. The interior lights were off. I knocked on the side window. No response. I walked around to the back of the cruiser, and that's when I saw the state emblem on the trunk. It was the old New Mexico patrol insignia, one that hadn't been used in decades. My chest tightened so hard I thought I was having a heart issue. The license plate looked rusted along the edges like the metal had been sitting out decades under weather. But the tires were spotless. The body paint was new. It made no sense. I went back to my cab shaking and sped away before logic could advise anything different. About 30 minutes later, the fog thinned enough that radio signal returned. The CB crackled. Another trucker's voice, casual and unaware. "Anyone else see a traffic stop outside Route 60? Guy with old patrol decals?" Another voice, older, scratched with static. "You mean Unit 09? Silence, then laughter from someone. "That old thing again?" I asked cautiously, "What's Unit 09? Static filled the channel for a beat. Then someone answered, "Some trooper died out here years back doing a stop he shouldn't have been alone for. They say his car was number 9. But Highway Patrol doesn't keep track of ghost stories officially." I didn't say anything. Didn't share what I'd seen. Didn't want to. When I reached El Paso, I checked my license and reg expecting something odd. maybe something missing or rearranged, but no. That wasn't the part that bothered me. It was the citation. Pinned under the wiper blade was a paper ticket, old paper, yellowed edges, handwritten instead of printed. The fine box was blank. The violation list section simply read, "Not alone." No officer signature, no badge number, no date, just unit marking 09. I tried asking an officer at a way station 2 days later who signed highway tickets in that region. He looked at it briefly before his face changed color. He excused himself, went into the station house, made a phone call, came back out, handed it to me without touching the paper directly, and said, "Sir, no officer wrote this. Throw it out. And if someone claiming to be Unit 9 tries to pull you over again, don't stop. Call us directly." I asked him why. He said this quietly, like repeating something he shouldn't. Number 9 hasn't been active since 1988. He wouldn't elaborate. He wouldn't even make eye contact. I should have thrown the citation away. I meant to. But something stopped me. I put it in my logbook instead. I don't know why. I tell myself I'll throw it out when I'm ready. But sometimes, especially on lonely nights when fog settles deeper than usual, I pull it out and read the handwritten words like a warning I still don't fully understand. Every time I pass that stretch of Route 60 in bad weather, I see headlights in the mirror just a little too close, a little too steady. And sometimes, even without looking directly, I know there's a cruiser pacing behind me that won't show up when I actually check. I haven't stopped for a highway patrol car at night since, and I probably never will again. I was running a refrigerated haul from Salt Lake toward Fresno, scheduled to deliver before noon, which meant driving most of the night through desert nothing. Winter nights in that region don't feel like other winters. They feel drier, hollower, like the air is evacuated of anything warm or familiar. It was after 3 in the morning when I realized I needed fuel. The gauge wasn't urgent yet, but I don't like gambling after midnight when desert stretches go 50 to 80 miles without a station. I spotted a fuel exit sign, plain metal, reflective only from my high beams. It didn't list brands or amenities, just a symbol for gas and a tiny arrow pointing right. I hesitated, considering I still had enough to go another hour, but something nagged at me, like my gut wanted the reassurance of a stop rather than the fear of an empty tank farther down. So I took the exit. The side road leading to the station felt strangely narrow, barely 2 lanes, no lighting along the shoulders, no other vehicles merging or leaving. The structures around were little more than faint silhouettes, maybe old farms or industrial lots long abandoned. Eventually, my headlights caught a sign, open 24 hours. But the building ahead looked asleep under a dead sky. Only 3 pumps under a rusted canopy and a convenience store behind dusty glass. The only lights were inside. Fluorescents humming, flickering 1 row at a time, the kind of unstable lighting that seems to throb instead of shine. I pulled to the far pump, never like being boxed near the building in case something goes wrong, and stepped out. The cold moved through my jacket immediately. The pump keypad screen was on, but dim, green text, old LCD. I inserted my card, but the machine asked me to see cashier. That annoyed me. Why have a card slot if it won't take payment? I walked toward the building, boots scraping sand and cracked concrete. The automatic door didn't open when I approached, so I assumed it wasn't automatic at all. I pulled it gently and the door opened with a long, dragging squeak. Inside, everything smelled faintly of bleach, mixed with metal, like someone cleaned blood or rust from old pipes. The floors were spotless but unevenly shiny, like someone rushed a mop job. Only one aisle light was out, leaving the candy section half-shadowed. There was a clerk behind the counter wearing a red jacket and a baseball cap pulled low enough I couldn't see much of his face. He didn't greet me, didn't move, just stood behind the counter with his hands flat against the register, staring at something beyond me, or through me. "Pump isn't taking cards," I said, clearing my throat when he didn't look up. "Need to pay in here?" He slowly lowered his chin, like he was remembering how to turn his head, then blinked once, just once, too slow. "Pump 3, he said quietly, voice oddly flat. "Prepay." I handed him my card. He didn't swipe it. He lifted the card to eye level and stared at it long enough I almost snatched it back. Then he tapped buttons on the register without looking down. "How much?" he asked. 200, I said. He typed something without looking at the buttons. No beep, no confirmation printout, no screen reading anything. He returned the card. His hand was extremely cold when his fingers brushed mine, so cold I pulled back. I walked toward the door when he suddenly said, "You're the only one tonight." I paused, not sure what to make of that. He hadn't sounded conversational, more like he was reading a fact aloud that someone forced him to say. I turned back. "Sorry?" He stared past me again, toward the highway darkness. "You're the only one tonight." I didn't know what that meant, and didn't want to find out. I hurried out, started fueling, watching the convenience store reflection in the truck window while the diesel clattered into the tank. The clerk was staring out the window at me, face barely visible behind glass, but it looked like his eyes weren't focused on the truck. They were angled lower, like he was watching something near my legs or the pavement. He didn't move once. About halfway through fueling, the pump clicked off suddenly. I checked the display expecting full amount, but it only showed $46.82, not even close to the prepaid total. I squeezed the trigger, nothing. Tried hanging up and restarting, no response. The receipt printer spat a blank receipt, completely blank paper. I cursed under my breath and climbed into the cab, determined to either move on or figure things out later. I checked the clock on my dashboard. It read 3:59 a.m. I remember that exactly because minutes later, the strangest minute of my driving life happened. I pulled back onto the single-lane station road and headed toward the on-ramp when something caught my eye in the side mirror. A man moving behind the pumps, slow, unsteady steps, like each limb wasn't quite connected right. His arms swayed strangely, elbows bent outward, like he was trying to balance on uneven ground. He didn't look like the clerk. This man was taller, wearing dark clothing, hood up. His steps weren't natural. They twitched with jerking movements like his muscles fired seconds too late. I slowed near the stop sign at the exit, trying not to panic. The man suddenly changed direction, turning sharply toward my truck, head tilting slightly. Not enough to see his face, just enough to sense awareness. Then he started moving faster. Not running, just quicker, twitching steps. I hit the accelerator harder than I should have, pulling onto the ramp like someone being chased, even though I didn't fully understand what I was afraid of. My chest felt tight, adrenaline spiking before logic caught up. When I reached highway speed, I checked mirrors again. Nobody behind. Station shrinking into a tiny rectangle of flickering light. My breathing finally slowed. Then CB radio crackled, no channel activity for hours, suddenly alive. The same flat voice tone as the clerk, but not identical. Almost copied. "You're the only one tonight." I froze. It wasn't a transmission. It sounded like someone whispering at the edge of the speaker, close enough to feel breath if it had been a real person. I grabbed the radio and switched channels fast, all the way through emergency frequencies. All static. No chatter. No signals. I drove until sunrise came up over the Sierra foothills. The first real light made my nerves release slightly, but uneasiness stayed. I stopped in Fresno, finished unloading, tried to erase the experience by pretending fatigue had messed with perception. Later that morning, during coffee with another driver, I mentioned, very casually, fueling somewhere around 4 a.m. near Route 152. His face changed immediately. Not fear, recognition. He asked quietly, "Small station? 3 pumps? Guy who barely speaks?" My stomach dropped. "Yeah," I said slowly. "You stopped there?" He shook his head. "They closed that station 3 years ago. Someone went missing there. They haven't staffed it since. The pumps don't even work. Power lines disconnected." I felt ice crawl along my ribs. "That's impossible," I said. "Lights were on. Guy was in there." He stared into his coffee a long time before answering. "That place burned out electrical wiring during a fire. The building's still standing but closed. Nobody fuels there. Nobody works there." Later that afternoon, I Googled the station. The only picture online was from 2020, boarded and abandoned. Same sign, same canopy. In every comment thread, truckers mentioned one thing. No matter what time, the clock inside is always stuck at 4 a.m. My receipt, the blank one, had a timestamp printed in thermal ink across the bottom corner. 4 a.m. Every time I pass that exit, no matter the season, I see the sign flicker just enough to catch my attention. And every time, I keep driving. I was hauling manufactured parts out of Iowa and headed toward Kentucky. It was early spring but still cold at night, and storms were rolling across the Midwest in unpredictable waves, clouds breaking and rebuilding overhead in ways that made the night feel alive. Weather radar showed storms east of my route, but I knew how unpredictable things got crossing rural counties. Dispatch had already reminded me to take detours marked by roadwork, which meant trusting temporary signage I don't normally rely on. But when the interstate closes, you follow whatever routes the state highway folks post. I hit construction warnings about 50 miles east of Des Moines, big orange signs reflecting back in my high beams. A temporary portable traffic light blinked yellow across both directions of the merge. A small illuminated arrow board pointed trucks toward a rural bypass road. I turned south as instructed, reassured by the presence of multiple roadwork barricades. Normally those make me feel safer. Someone official thought this through. Around midnight, the weather started getting strange. Stars flickered in and out behind fast-moving clouds, but there was no wind hitting the cab. Usually when clouds move that fast, you can feel something pushing the rig, but this time the air stayed unnervingly calm. The bypass road narrowed. Houses became scarce. Eventually, farmland gave way to dense trees on both sides. I kept expecting another detour sign, but the last one I saw indicated construction 5 miles. I counted each mile carefully, watching the odometer, but at mile 6 still no more signage. Just forest, just darkness, just occasional reflective eyes of coyotes or deer near the ditch line. Another half hour of twists and hills later, I reached a long, elevated bridge. Not massive, not like interstate scale, just long enough that I couldn't see the end of it. Metal framework rose overhead in repeating arches. Looked old. Not rusted exactly, but weathered the way abandoned industrial equipment gets. The odd thing was how the bridge appeared suddenly. No let-up signage, no weight limit postings, nothing. Usually rural bridges list ton capacity, especially ones carrying heavy trucks, and the construction detour never warned of one. Storm clouds above flickered faint lightning. The light reflected against the metal beams, giving them a faint bluish sheen. I eased onto the bridge, listening for anything unusual. Bridges usually create wind noise, echo vibrations, suspension rattle, small cues that you're above open space, but this crossing was silent. The deck felt unnaturally smooth, almost polished, and the guardrails looked too clean to match the rest of the structure. Halfway across, the CB crackled faintly. Nothing spoken, just static, like someone pressing the mic but never saying anything. I waited to hear if anyone called out, but the static cut off abruptly. I chalked it up to electrical interference from the storm. When I finally reached the other side, I noticed something odd right away. No construction signs, no merge arrows, no road markings. The trees thickened again, swallowing both shoulders so tightly that branches hung into the lane, brushing the trailer now and then. My headlights passed a small wooden sign on the right. Weight limit 4 tons. 4 tons? My rig weighs upward of 40. That limit is for small vehicles, not semis. The sign was positioned on the far side of the crossing, not before it. Like a warning too late to matter. I stopped. I don't slam brakes on dark roads, bad form and too risky, but I slowed to a crawl and checked the mirrors, debating turning around. But backing an 80-foot rig across a narrow metal bridge is suicide. And there was no space to turn around even if I tried. I kept moving slowly, heart in my throat, scanning for signs this wasn't the right road. After 10 minutes, the forest abruptly opened into farmland again. Silence settled strangely, the type that feels like someone has placed a thick blanket over all sound. No animals, no insects, nothing. My headlights revealed a small crossroad sign, one of those reflective green ones mounted on a rural post, but the letters were faded beyond readable. I tried calling dispatch to confirm I was on the right route, but the call refused to connect. Bars showed signal, but calls timed out before ringing. 30 minutes later, rain hit. Sudden sheet rain, hammering across the windshield so fast I could barely see the road lines. My wipers fought the downpour, squeaking across glass like they hadn't been used in months. The rain lasted only a minute before stopping abruptly again, leaving the road dry. That's weather you feel inside your bones, not weather following ordinary patterns. Finally, near 3 in the morning, I reached a junction with a more familiar county road and turned east again. Within an hour, I hit a well-lit truck stop and parked for a nap, exhausted and mentally drained. My cab clock showed 3:52 a.m. When I woke around 9, sunlight bright against aluminum trailers outside, my first instinct was to check a map. I traced last night's path and realized something immediately. The county road I exited from doesn't connect to any state bypass detour near the interstate. The bridge wasn't listed. No elevated crossing existed along that route. I checked satellite view, street view, every mapping resource I could find. Nothing showed a bridge even vaguely similar anywhere near that detour. I went into the truck stop diner for coffee and asked casually if anyone knew about a long metal bridge west of here. The waitress laughed like I'd told a weird joke. "Honey, there hasn't been a bridge west of here in years. Flood washed the road in '09. State never rebuilt it. It's dead-end miles back." I felt my pulse thump hard, one slow beat. I asked, "You sure?" "I crossed something last night. Big metal structure." Her face changed to confusion. "We don't have metal bridges out that direction. Old one was concrete. Wasn't safe for trucks even before it washed out." Another driver overheard and chimed in. "You mean that phantom detour truckers talk about? Some think road signs send people down closed highways." He laughed at his own comment, but his eyes looked uncertain. "Just stories people tell on long nights." I didn't argue, didn't say another word. I just sipped my coffee and listened to my own breathing, trying to convince myself fatigue caused everything. Later that afternoon, I checked my dashcam footage from the previous night. I wanted proof, maybe a glimpse of metal crossbeams, maybe lightning reflecting on steel. But something strange happened. The footage showed road, trees, occasional raindrops, but no elevated structure. No metal beams overhead. The video timeline jumped from one forest section directly to another, like the camera either malfunctioned or simply did not record that segment. Even stranger, a GPS log recorded speed during that time consistent with climbing incline and descending grade. Elevation change without actual map change. As if I drove uphill across a valley, but never actually crossed anything recognized by mapping data. I haven't told anyone else. Because if you tell someone you crossed a bridge that doesn't exist on any map, and that didn't appear on video, and that was followed by roads leading back to known geography, people don't nod and say, "Yeah, that makes sense." They look at you like you've lost something important in your head. The weird thing? I still think about that weight limit sign. The only readable thing across that entire detour. Positioned at the end, not the beginning. Weight limit 4 tons. Sometimes when I'm rolling through dark rural stretches late at night, I catch myself checking the shoulder for unmarked detours or reflective barriers that weren't there last week. And every time the weather shifts strangely overhead or storms appear where radar shows none, I wonder if I'm about to see the approach of metal arches again. And I know with a certainty that sinks deeper than fear that if I ever drive back that way at night, no matter what detour signs tell me, I'm turning around. Because whatever I crossed that night wasn't built for trucks. Maybe wasn't built for anything living at all.